Welcome to the Built Around You podcast, the podcast dedicated to anyone building or renovating their home. Why is building a home so complex and stressful? Why do building projects run over time and budget? Welcome to the podcast Built Around You. If you're baffled by how complex house design, planning permission, and building seem to be, then this is the podcast for you. When I was growing up, it always struck me that watching relatives or neighbours renovating or building their home, it always seemed so stressful. There seemed to be loads of dust, loads of problems, loads of unexpected bills, and of course these projects seem to go on forever. I remember even our parents when we were young, there was 4 of us young children and of course my 2 parents living in a small house in Middleton, and we needed an extension. But my mum just couldn't face the idea of building an extension onto our house because both her and my father were out working and it would have been way too stressful. So this is something that always stuck with me, and I thought if I could gain some knowledge and experience in this field, this is something I'd like to change. So I studied civil engineering in UCC. I graduated in 1996 as a civil engineer, but I never really wanted to go into a design office. I wanted to work on site and learn how big builders operate and how project management works. So I worked for building contractors in Cork, in London, in Manchester and Dublin, and I saw how big builders project manage large projects, and I was able to gain an understanding of how project management really works and the value it adds. So in 2004, I set up my own building company, KMC Homes, building new homes in Cork and Limerick. So we started off as just a building contractor. But even in this case, with all my knowledge and experience, I still found a lot of these projects were quite stressful. You had architects going in one direction, engineers going in another direction, and then you had QSs and all the builders, and the poor client was left out in the sidelines. And I still thought it was quite an uncertain journey. And I thought there must be a way of improving this process. So we began to manage the whole process, bringing architects, engineers, and all the builders and tradesmen to the table. So all the information was in one place, and all the experts were managed by us. And I certainly felt there was a huge improvement here when you had all the knowledge and experience in one place managed for clients. They had a much easier path along their building process, and the whole journey was much more straightforward. So taking a step back from this, I thought the next logical step was to create an online resource where all this information is available in one place, and there's tips and advice for people self-building at the very start of a new build or renovation journey. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's an online resource for anyone at the very beginning of a new build or renovation journey, at the very start of their project. So today I'd like to start answering some questions I received on Instagram at KieranKMC, and so let's dive straight into those. So the first question is from the Instagram handle ICF Down at the Lake. With the rising energy costs, what would be your top 5 tips or inclusions while building your house to help reduce running costs? Well, I suppose the first thing, if you're building a new house, you have to comply to the new NZEB regulations. So your house is going to have to be an A2 at the very least. Now, to create an A2 house, what we would typically do is like you have a certain level of insulation in the floors and the walls, and that's all basically complying with building standards or building regulations. We would typically specify an air-to-water system, which is effectively replacing what would have been a gas or oil boiler in the past. So an air-to-water system will provide your heat now at a much lower running cost than gas or oil, and of course you're not using fossil fuels anymore. The only energy input is actually electrical input. So an air-to-water system typically works best with underfloor heating. So we would typically install underfloor heating on the ground floor, and if a client could afford it, we would install underfloor heating on the first floor. But this means putting in a concrete slab on the first floor. So you need to put in precast concrete slabs underneath this, or maybe kind of I-beams. So you're adding extra cost there initially, but you get the benefit of underfloor heating on the first floor, which means you don't have rads in the way of windows or beds or what have you in bedrooms. Typically, a plumber won't really charge any extra for underfloor heating on the first floor over and above a radiator system. So it's a worthwhile investment, really, although you will be paying more for the floor itself. Beyond that, you're likely going to need some form of active ventilation because with good building practice, you're going to be bringing your air tightness levels to quite a low level. So you've very little air leakage. But when you get a building as airtight as that, you need to control the amount of ventilation that's in the building because you don't have very much passive ventilation through air leakage like the houses of old. So you'd install at the minimum a demand control ventilation system. You could take it up a step further if you wanted to make your building even more airtight, which is a cost. And install a full heat recovery ventilation system. Now, the benefit of a heat recovery ventilation system is you are actually recovering heat from the expelled air. So you're taking out stale air, you're removing the heat from it, expelling it, and bringing in fresh air and using the heat you took from the expelled air and preheating your incoming air. So you're maintaining heat whilst improving the air quality of your house. That's a full heat recovery ventilation system, which costs a bit more. A demand control ventilation system, again, costing a bit less, is you're more just removing moisture-laden air principally from the wet areas of your house. So it could be the kitchen area, it could be the utility area, it could be your bathroom areas and showers and what have you. Beyond that, so you're probably going to get up to an A2 level that can comply with building regulations. If you want to go a step further and head closer to kind of an A1 level, you might be installing photovoltaic. Now, there's a variety of different ways of doing that with costs from kind of 7,000 or 8,000 euros up to maybe 15,000, 16,000 euros, whether you're putting in batteries or whether you're selling the electricity back to the grid, or whether you're removing some of the excess power and generating hot water for your hot water system. So that's another thing you can add, and that's certainly going to get you up to an A2, possibly even an A1 level. So I don't know if I've covered all your 5 there, but that's certainly how I would approach a project like yours. So the next question is from @RowanCat. Electric gates, what do you look out for? Kind of a tricky question. The first question really when you're building electric gates is how are you going to electrify them? So are you going to have a hinge system? Or are you going to have a rolling track system? No, a hinge system works grand on a level site. A rolling track system works best when you don't have a level site, but you have enough room to the left or right of one of your pillars to slide back. So that kind of comes down to the terrain of the site. Another thing to look out for is if you're on a very windy or coastal site, a rolling track system is better because it's much more robust. If you can imagine heavy winds blowing in and out of your driveway in the middle of winter, particularly in a coastal area where the winds tend to be higher anyway, they'll be blowing against your gates, which are opening and closing against the wind, and eventually you'll kind of start burning out the motors. So that's well worth considering. I would generally, as a kind of an insider tip, I would generally try and get the same company making the gate and automating it, because if you split that up, it's a nightmare trying to get the gate manufacturer to speak to the automation manufacturer, and they've got to talk about the different weights of the gates and the resistance and all that sort of things. And if anything goes wrong, you're kind of in the middle between the two of those. So if you can get one company to do everything, it's worth it, even though if it narrows down the amount of companies you can choose from. Like, you can probably just get a photograph of a nice gate you've seen on Instagram or Pinterest or whatever, and send it on to these outfits, and they'll generally be able to work from that. That's what I typically do, and they'll give you price options. I'd probably get it factory finished as well, get it galvanized and get it factory finished in a certain color, because it'll save you doing it, and again, it's probably a more robust color in the end of the day. So never realized there was so much to know about electric gates actually until I started answering that question. So I hope that's of value to you. So the next question is from @Sinead.Egan509. I want to do a 30 square foot extension, was hoping to do in the next 2 years, but with the prices, should we wait? Will the prices decrease on materials, or will they keep rising? Great question, Sinead. I can't answer definitively because like any builder's prices are as a result of the manufacturer's prices and the wholesaler prices, and going back to the commodity markets. And people always say, sure, builders' prices never go down. Well, they did go down in the recession, and down a fair bit. But, okay, so the first thing that went up, a year and a half ago was timber. Timber started going up, PVC started going up, steel started going up, and insulation started going up. And then later, more composite materials started going up, and then towards the very end, like concrete and concrete products and aggregates and all that kind of quarried materials started going up. Initially, all this was due to the post-COVID lockdowns being eased and construction industry firing up again, and everyone kind of wanted to get stuff done in their home because they've been stuck in their house for the last year or year and a half or whatever it was. So there was massive demand on the construction industry, and all this demand was drawing down on material supplies in Europe and even in the States. That has since washed through the system, and now, of course, with the very unfortunate war in Ukraine, things are very different, and we're all dealing with rising energy costs, and of course, a lot of these energy costs come into construction, be it for producing materials or indeed for, think of an excavator driver on site. He's using diesel as his machine is running, and all the builders are coming and going with vans. So just energy costs are going up in every direction. To answer your question, should you wait for 2 years? It's a very hard question to answer because, like, timber has come back a little bit. Steel has kind of leveled, maybe come back a little bit. I know, even talking to a zinc contractor as late as yesterday evening, zinc has come back a little bit. They're hoping it'll come back a little bit more. So there are early signs of improvement on some of the materials. I know concrete and aggregate is probably still going up post-Christmas. And of course, we have the concrete levy, which isn't going to help. So they're going to still going up. So you could take a view that things are kind of leveling now. I suppose we know an awful lot more about the war in Ukraine and the outcomes in terms of energy costs. I don't think anyone knows how all this is going to play out because we don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine. But whereas some things are still going up, some things have leveled and some things are coming back a little bit. So you could take the view that things are kind of leveling a bit now, and going into the future they should improve. I do think things that if things start reducing, will builders' prices start reducing? I think they'll have to be quite honest with you. So you can take a view on that yourself. Another thing I would say is, like, it kind of depends on your own circumstances. Like, I know we renovated our house last year and we could have waited a bit longer, but we just felt our kids were at a certain age. They were like in their early teens, and they're not going to be at home forever. So we thought, look, it's very important for us to have the nice next few years when our children are still at home before they go off to, do a trade or go to university or start working or whatever. It's nice to have them at home and have the house nice while they're at home. So we took a view of doing things sooner rather than later. So kind of it comes down to your family circumstances as well, and where you are in your life, and then of course what your budget is. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, but I think I've hopefully given you a bit more information so you can make a more informed decision. And so the next question is from @Alb1 Kenobi. Lots of condensation on our bedroom and ensuite window. No fan or vent in the ensuite. How to fix this issue? Well, I mean, condensation is caused by two principal reasons. You have warm air condensing on a cold surface with inadequate ventilation. So ideally what you'd be doing is you'd be ensuring that the cold surface is as warm as possible, so as well insulated as possible. So if you have a single glazed window, that means having a double glaze. I wouldn't be promoting going to triple glaze in this particular instance, given that it's an ensuite window and probably a small window. So I'd certainly ensure the surface is as well insulated as possible. Then you can look at the ventilation. I mean, in the past, people used to use kind of vent-axia type vents where you hit a switch in the wall and you could hear the fan whizzing away. Or maybe it came on automatically with the light. Things have moved on a bit since then. Now, it is the cheapest way to install a ventilation system in your ensuite, no doubt. But people have moved on from that. So people are typically using a demand control ventilation system, which is an active ventilation system. So when you generate steam in your shower, so it's kind of water vapor, that calls on the ventilation system, and it'll extract the moisture-laden air from your shower area through a duct system and out through a vent in your roof, and bring in some fresh air to replenish that through a vent in your window. And so the next question is from Paulie Kavanagh. Is triple glaze worth it with a U value of 1.2 compared to 0.7 for an extra €3,000? Okay, so it's a tricky enough question to answer, because like €3,000 over what? I mean, what is the percentage? I mean, are your windows coming in at 18 grand and now all of a sudden they're 21 grand? Are they coming in at 35 grand and now all of a sudden they're 38 grand? Because, it's a different percentage on the overall sum, and it gives you some sense of kind of where your budget lies and priorities. It also depends on what you're looking to achieve in the overall house. Are you an A2 trying to get to an A1? Are you just trying to maintain your A2 and put your best foot forward? What I would say is, like, triple glaze is great for primarily for a north elevation or a south elevation. In a north elevation, you try and make your windows that bit smaller to prevent against heat loss, and triple glazing will also prevent against heat loss. On a southerly elevation, your windows can be that little bit bigger, because you'll get a bit of solar gain, and your best views and light will come from your southerly elevation. If you have a lot of glazing on your southerly elevation and you want to protect against excess solar gain in the summer, maybe in a sunroom, it could be well worth installing triple glaze for this elevation. Now, you could take a view on your east and west elevations if you don't have a whole lot of glazing there, because you're not going to get as much solar gain and you're not going to get as much heat loss. So you could take a view that just maybe use your triple glazing on the front and rear elevations, and maybe step aside on the back to double glazing on your east and west. Maybe that's a value call you can make. So the final question is from @Mick_Barco. Experience in getting windows from outside Ireland, for example, Poland. Personally, I've never bought windows from outside Ireland. Not to say I wouldn't, but I suppose my concern here is, like, when people are building a home, obviously everyone's trying to cut costs, and particularly in today's climate when costs have soared so much. But like, you really have to think, a building project isn't really over as soon as you turn the key and walk in the door of your new home or extended home. What happens in 2 years later if there's a problem with the window, or a problem with a variety of windows, and you need to contact someone to come back and fix it? Now, if you're getting them from Poland, the Polish people won't be coming over from Poland to install them, so you'll probably be installing them yourself, or maybe getting a building contractor to install them. But the problem is now you've broken up the supply element from the fit element. So that'll affect your warranty. If there's an issue with the windows and the Polish company haven't fitted them, they might say, well, look, maybe they weren't fitted properly, and maybe they weren't fitted properly. So you could have warranty problems. I'd also prefer to have a local company supply and fit the windows, because if there's an issue, at least they'll come back, if they're only down the road, to come back and fix the window. So I'd always be concerned about, 2 years later when a problem happens, because that can be a very significant thing on the windows of your house. So I haven't imported windows myself. I worked on a project years ago where the client imported the windows, and they were looking for us to fit them. And I didn't think it was a great idea, to be quite honest with you, and I personally wouldn't recommend it. So thank you very much for tuning into the Built Around You podcast today. Today was our maiden voyage, of course. I hope you found some valuable tips and advice there. If you have any other questions you'd like to send them in to Instagram, my Instagram handle is @KieranKMC. We're going to have another exciting podcast for you next Monday, where we'll be interviewing someone who's actually renovated their home, and we'll hear their story. So speak to you then.